Hey, my friends, welcome back. And thank you so much. You know, I love you, and I love you for many reasons. I love you because of who you are and whose you are. But I also love you because you have chosen to go on this journey with us. It's hard to believe we're in week 7, personality type 6, often referred to as the loyalist. Man, loyalty means so much to me. I've had certain 6s come to me and say, hey, I think you might be a 6 more than an 8. That's a compliment, frankly. I'm kind of right square in the middle of an 8, but I am huge on loyalty. I mean, loyalty is everything to me. And that's why I love 6s so much, because they're so loyal. Last week in the series, we talked about one of the loyalists in Scripture. His name's Peter. And a lot of people talk about Peter and they focus on one of the areas of a 6 that is one of their struggles, which is fear. And Peter did have moments where he was fearful. Who doesn't? We're all fearful. But the thing about Peter is that when he was scared or when he got fearful, he was in the middle of doing something amazing. And Jesus said, come and follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. He walked away from his livelihood. I mean, he was the first one to say, Jesus, you are the Son of God. And we know in the storm, that's what we talked about last weekend, Jesus is walking on water, and Peter says, Lord, let me come to you. And he gets out of the boat and he walks on water. I get so irritated at people who focus on his fear, on the fact that he took his eyes off the storm maker and put it on the storm. Those are all true statements. His shortest prayer, help, Lord. I would rather focus on the fact that he said, Lord, you tell me and I'm getting out of this boat and I'm following you. He did it. That's what I love about 6s, man. They get out of the boat. They make it happen. We have more 6s in our church and probably more 6s in your small group and community than any other number. Now, they're kind of broke up in different areas and they all are very different and unique in the way that they're wired, but they're loyal. And if you want to know how to love a 6, let me give you some suggestions. First of all, with a 6, be very direct and clear. They also don't like you to beat around the bush. They want to know what you're thinking, but then listen to them carefully. Sometimes they need more time to verbally process what they're going through. Don't judge their anxiety. You know, I know some 6s who they get hung up on their anxieties. And I don't mean that they let their anxieties hold them back. I mean, they feel bad because they have them. Can I say this to you 6s that are watching? We all have them. We just hide our anxieties and fears differently. Some of us overcome them just by pressing forward. That doesn't make us better or stronger. So don't put yourself down for that. You know, one of the things that you need to do with 6s is laugh and make jokes with them. They're playful and they enjoy laughter. Another thing I jotted down is acknowledge that they're loyal, responsible, and that they're always looking out for the best interest of others. That's the amazing part that I love about 6s. You know, they also need lots of reassurance about your commitment to them. If you're married to a 6, be careful, because they will be loyal to you so much so that you could hurt them deeply by not returning that loyalty. These are the challenges that we have in blending our personality types. You know, Peter would go on to deny Jesus 3 times. That's true. He did deny Jesus and he did abandon him. But when Jesus resurrected from the dead, he said to Peter 3 times, Peter, if you love me, feed my sheep. Those 3 statements were an acknowledgement to Peter that he was completely and totally forgiven and restored. And Peter would go on to change the world. You don't think Peter was a 6 that was transformed? You haven't read 1 Peter, 2 Peter. You haven't read any of the writings about Peter in Scripture. He was a transformed leader, and he was loyal to the death. History tells us that Peter would be crucified, and he said to his persecutors, do not hang me the way you hung my Savior. Hang me upside down. I'm not worthy to be crucified like him. Does that sound like a scared person? Sounds like a braver person than me. That's what a loyalist is. So today, as you're loving the loyalists in your group, love the 6s for who they are, help them overcome their fears and anxieties so they're not controlled by them. And as you listen to Pastor Paul bring a story that I know will continue what I've shared with you and encourage you, and Brittany will bring you something that will build habits in your life. Let these words encourage each and every one of you. I love you guys.
The Enneagram 6 is the loyalist. Now, the first thing that most people ever learn about the 6 is about their relationship to fear. See, 6s, they're catastrophe people. They're people that worry about the worst case scenario. And some of the 6s that I've talked to have said, yeah, you know what? It is true that I have sort of this constant script, this constant narrative in my head that makes me plan and think about what could go wrong. But the thing about 6s is that they're called the loyalists for a reason. See, what they really want is they want to know that they're a part of something. They're on a team with other people who are just as committed to them as the loyalist is to the cause. And so when they have that, when they find a group of people that they're in and they're all in and they're going, 6s, man, they just go. They run. They commit themselves to the cause. They're loyal, they're committed, and they're incredibly hard workers. And so if you're in a relationship with a 6 where you've earned their trust, you have a friend for life. And we're going to look at the story today of a loyalist who had his ups and downs. He had times in his life where he had that sort of worst case scenario planning, and then there were other times where he was just running, he was following God, he was doing everything that he was asked to do, and he's turns out to be one of the most important people who's ever lived. But it all is built on this foundation of a moment in his life where God out-loyalists the loyalist. God out-6s the 6 and shows him that God is always going to be more committed, more faithful, more loyal than even the best of us. When we watch the life of Abraham through the book of Genesis, we see the classic tension of the life of a 6. See, this is a person who has sort of hedged himself off in protecting against the worst case scenario. I mean, this is a man who we read in Genesis 14 has a trained armed guard of 318 Special Forces soldiers in his household just to make sure that he's protected, that he's safe. This is a man who twice, at least, shows that he has this standing agreement with his wife that if he gets in trouble, she's going to take the fall. He once, when he's in Egypt, because he's running away from disaster, he pawns her off to the Pharaoh. See, they have this agreement that they say, hey, if we get in trouble, just say you're my sister, because then they won't kill me, because they'll fall in love with you and they'll like me because they love you. And so it actually happens. They walk into Egypt. The men see her, she's very beautiful, and so Pharaoh takes her to be one of his wives, and of course God stops him, thankfully, because Abraham wouldn't. The problem is it happens again, and so apparently this was like an understood thing. This was the normal plan. If Abraham ever gets in trouble, he says, hey Sarah, you take the fall. You put yourself at great risk, and maybe they'll kill you, maybe they'll take you as their wives, whatever, but as long as I save my own skin, we'll be fine. So we have this constant fear dynamic with Abraham, but he's also the man who, when God shows up in his life and says, hey, I want you to take everything you have, and this is a man who we can tell from the way the story goes is incredibly rich. So he says, I want you to take everything you have, I want you to pack up your tents, I want you to pack up your family and all your servants, and I want you to move. And Abraham says, okay. And he doesn't even ask really where he's going. God says, I'll show you on the way, and Abraham goes. This is the man who, in Genesis 22, when God shows up and he says, hey, I want you to take your son that was born as the result of a miracle, your son that all the promises of God are dependent on. I want you to take him. I want you to take him to the top of the mountain, and I want you to sacrifice him. And Abraham knows just as well as you and I know that if Isaac is dead, he's not having any kids. And so God's promises are at stake and on the line, and Abraham's legacy is on the line, and none of this can happen. None of the promises that God has made for the future can happen if Isaac is dead. But Abraham just goes. He says, you know what? You said to do this, and I'm going to do it. And you know what? Your promises are your problem. So we see the loyalist at work in the life of Abraham in both the good and the bad. But the fundamental question that Abraham needs answered from God is, God, are you really with me? Are you as committed to this as I am? And we find a story where God specifically speaks into the fears and the doubts and the questions of the loyalist in Genesis chapter 15. See, in this story, God begins playing out a common narrative that Abraham would have been familiar with. In this time, one of the ways that they would make covenants was kind of this gruesome ceremony where they would take animals, whether it was birds or flocks, sheep, goats, even cows, and they would actually cut the animals in half and put them on either side of a path. And then the animals obviously would bleed onto the path, and the people making the covenant would walk through that trail of blood to make a promise to one another. And the idea of the covenant was, if I break my promise to you, you can do to me what we've done to these animals. And so it was a form of blood covenant. And so God goes to Abraham and he says, hey, we're going to make a covenant. We're going to make some promises to each other. And he asks Abraham to prepare the path. And so Abraham takes the animals and he prepares the path, and the blood is there and everything's ready and set to go. And then all of a sudden, God changes the script. So he says, Abraham, I want you to stand aside. And he actually puts Abraham sort of into this trance. He puts him into a deep sleep. And God walks the path by himself. See, it's so important for the loyalist to know that if you're on my team, you're with me, you're just as committed as I am. Because loyalists, they're usually the first ones to buy in. They're usually the ones that are all in. And if you're on a team with them, if you're doing a project with them, if you're married to a six, you know that they are wholeheartedly committed to you as long as you're proving yourself trustworthy, as long as you are just as committed as they are. And so before any of this, God decides that for Abraham, he's going to go first. And this is very early on in Abraham's story with God. And so God, in walking through this path on his own, he says to Abraham, Abraham, I know that you're going to be committed to me. I know that you're going to keep your promises. I don't have any doubt about that. But before I ask you to do anything, before I start building this world the way that we're going to build it, before we start building the nation of Israel, I just want you to know that I'm in. I'm in, no questions asked. I'm with you, and I'm going to keep my promises to you. I'm going to be faithful and loyal to you no matter what you do. And this is the fundamental doubt, the fundamental question, and the fundamental fear that the six brings to God. It's God, are you really with me? Are you really for me? Are you really on my side? Are you really going to do what you say you're going to do? Because I know I am. God, I'm going to keep my side of the bargain, but I need to know definitively for sure that you're going to keep your side of the bargain for me. So if you're a type 6, if you're a loyalist, you've probably realized by now that your fundamental question is the same as Abraham's was. It's a question, God, are you really for me? Are you really with me? Are we actually gonna do this together, or am I just putting myself out there? Am I risking faith only to be let down? And so you need the same answer that God gave to Abraham, and that is the settled, established knowledge that God always goes first for you. He always steps out. He always risks. He's with you. He's for you. And when you step out in faith, it's always a response. Because God in the cross and in the incarnation of Jesus, He took the initiative. He went first to be loyal and faithful to you. And God in your life, over and over and over and over again, He's been faithful, He's been loyal, and He's gone first. And He's said to you over and over and over and over again, I'm with you. No matter what you do, no matter how fearful you may be, no matter your doubts or questions, I'm with you and I'm for you. And God says over and over and over again to Abraham, Abraham, I'm with you, I'm on your side, and I will fight for you. So if you can settle that question, you can ask God, would you show me the places in my life where you have already shown up and already proven yourself? Then you know what? Like Abraham was in his better moments, you will change the world. Because that fear that you live with in the back of your head will be settled by the fact that God has conquered everything for you, and you never need to ask that question again.
Like Abraham, loyalists are committed, responsible, hardworking people who can be counted on to get the job done when it really matters. They're team players who work hard to make sure everyone wins. You want a loyalist on your team because they're great problem solvers and they have no problem doing what it takes to make sure everyone succeeds. They also tend to know pretty quickly who they can trust and who they can't, though in their weaker moments they can become skeptical of everyone. As their name suggests, their filter for almost everything is loyalty, and they always know who is on their team and who isn't. When loyalists find a cause they believe in, they'll give their whole lives to it, which makes them committed humanitarians, teachers, and public servants. Loyalists show us God's faithfulness. God says He'll never leave us. He'll never give up on us, never let us fall away from His love, and He means it. In their weaker moments, loyalists can become overwhelmed with fear, and instead of spending their time working toward the causes they've chosen, they turn towards self-protection. Like Abraham, they plan out ways to keep themselves safe from threats that may or may not even materialize. And even sometimes their paranoia and disaster planning keeps them from accomplishing anything at all. Or they become so paralyzed by fear of betrayal that they sabotage the relationships that are normally so valuable to them. Because they're so prone to fear, loyalists sometimes have a short memory when it comes to the good things God does in their lives. That's why our habit of the week is journaling. Specifically, we're going to build what we call a Do It Again journal. We all have a tendency to forget what God has done for us, but over and over again in the Bible, God calls us to remember. He asks us to retell the stories of our faith, to remind ourselves and one another that He is faithful. He is good, and He always keeps His promises. That's one way to look at the Old Testament. It's just one long story of God keeping His promises over and over again. So this week, we're going to write down the things God does, and we're going to ask Him to do it again. Because sometimes we just need a reminder that even when things don't go the way we'd hoped they would, God carried us through it, and we're still here. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I'll see you next time.